So next up, I'm going to welcome Guy to the stage, guys from AccessiblePRS. And I think you've been working with kind of various bodies, including kind of national trading standards, around this new scheme for estate agents.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. So I'm Guy Harris. I run AccessiblePRS. And I set up about 5 years ago in order to catalyze accessibility and inclusion in the property sector. And so for me, that's a kind of a big dot joining piece, working with in different areas. So that's the PRS, it's agents, it's property portals, it's DLUC, it's NHS England, build to rent, so all manner, lenders. So it's about joining up. What do I have to do to make the housing more accessible? And really, I've got 3 key objectives. One is to increase the supply of accessible homes at scale, because as Mira was talking about, the adaptations piece is part of it, but we, broadly speaking, have a very inaccessible housing stock in the UK. The second is around the search processes and also the processes between where, say, there's a funding stream or an idea such as Hold, shared ownership scheme for people with long-term disabilities, but actually to get keys in the door, there are too many barriers in place, and so there's too few people accessing these routes. And the third is about within housing is changing or rewriting the narrative so that people understand why it's how it's relatable, why it's relevant, and why it's commercially beneficial. So I was seeing in that last piece that there's quite a bit of chat about landlords and what they do, what they don't do. And, there's an interesting, I think, media struggle going on there because actually the government haven't been building social homes. We're about 1.4 million social homes short. So what I'm seeing is people who are in the PRS who are trying to rent privately, but actually they shouldn't be. They should have security of tenure, and they should have the affordable rents, and they should have homes, social homes. So there are lots of key issues. But critically, one of my work streams is with the estate agents and the property portals and the CRMs, so that sit between them. That's the platform that passes the information from one to the other. And so I've had some amazing work with some amazing clients. And so, working with Rightmove and Chesterton's and Savills and Jones Lang LaSalle and sort of some independents and smaller agencies as well. And what I see is they're only too happy to do things, and they work really well with it. And they, we're seeing some really big changes on the ground where people are searching for properties. I'm particularly interested in wheelchair users. I am a wheelchair user. I had a spinal injury 20 years ago. But because I started out in agency 25 years ago, I understand how the property sector works and what the constraints they face is. And so therefore, in terms of designing a process that works, we're kind of making headway. And so what Paul's referring to are what's called the material information updates. Material information is something that sits under national trading standards. It's the information that must be available on property listings so that you as a consumer can know what you're getting into, or know, when you're going to either buy or rent a property right from the start, that information is transparent and available. From my perspective, my work was always, how can I, given that we have an inaccessible housing stock, how can I do this? What needs to change, or what can we do? What's the low-hanging fruit that means we can start looking for property in a searchable and filterable way, and that gives the information? Okay, so number of things on here. Essentially, if you know that what the property portals present is they don't do that information. So petitioning Rightmove is a waste of time. It's the agents that provide the information, and they do it through these CRM platforms. What I'm looking for is what I call the 3 a.m. test. That is, can a person go online in the middle of the night and search and filter for the properties they need, and see from those property listings, is the information available? Can they be the first ones in the morning, as soon as the office opens, to book the first viewing? And that gives them much more equality of opportunity to find a property that works for them. There are lots of bits. So the material information updates is what trading standards have now said must be available. The guidance is very clear and it's very pragmatic. So we can't suddenly have an accessible housing stock. So we have to work within the constraints of what we have and what property people can give, because they're experts in property and they're not experts in disability, and that's kind of key to the success of this. So there are 3 new property characteristics: step-free access, that includes lifts, ramps, and level thresholds; wet room, which includes level access showers; and lateral living. Now, lateral living is really clearly defined, and it's about not excluding properties that may work as well as including properties that will work. So lateral living is any property with a kitchen, bathroom, living room, and at least 1 bedroom on the entry level. And we say entry level, not ground level, because you could have an upper maisonette or a duplex in a block of flats. And so that, since 30th of November, that information was released. Now the agents, CRMs, and property portals, because they all have to leap together, are doing that work. Rightmove. So I've worked in varying degrees with all the portals. Rightmove slightly went off and did their own thing, which in some ways is okay, in some ways slightly frustrating. So they created this list of property characteristics you can see on the screen before you, and sent out the guidance to all the CRM platforms. So to give you an example, in the UK, there's something like 24,500 agencies. There's hundreds of CRM platforms which all have their own way of delivering the information. So Rightmove's sort of receiving information via about 800 different feed types. So it was a slightly complex piece of work. So now, for example, the reason I find the Rightmove one slightly confusing is you can have, if I look at the list there, you've got ramped access and you've got step-free access. And so they're kind of the same things, but if an agent only clicks one of them because they don't really know how it works or what the difference is, then we create a sort of an error in the system where the same property might not appear in different categories, although it has different categories, and therefore educating the user about how to search for properties is also slightly complex. On the Market uses the Rightmove live data feed. I hope this isn't too technical. And so what that means is that they're waiting for Rightmove to implement this, which will be the end of Q2, so that's June this year. However, on the Market, we're really keen to do something, to be proactive for accessibility. And so a couple of years ago, they used a thing of data enhancement, where if an agent had written certain keywords or phrases in the written description, then On the Market would capture that information, allocate an accessible features icon to the property listing. When you click on the icon, a little pop-up box would appear and it would say, why it had allocated that feature. So we're in an in-between phase where agents are starting to get to grips with it. Different CRM platforms are doing the work. So, for example, a company called MRI, which does work with hundreds of agents, they've already implemented it. And then the property portals, by the time the property portals go live, so that there should already be properties to view, and that's why there's a slight gap in the timings. Zoopla's handling it slightly differently, and so the way they have it is at the back end. So what where people enter the information, they've put in 5 new property characteristics. So they've got the 3: the step-free access, wet room, and lateral living. They've put in disabled features, which is slightly woolly, doesn't mean anything. That's likely to cause false positives in search results. And they've also put in wheelchair accessible. Now, where I give guidance to agents, I say that they should only be using this if the property is built to M43 Part B standards. So if that property is actually, according to planning, wheelchair accessible. The difference with Zoopla thinks that if you have too many filters, applicants won't, or website users won't use them. And so they across the board, this isn't just to do with accessibility, have limited their filters, and the way they do it is with a key phrase search. And so when you're searching for a property, you as a searcher, you need to know what phrases or what words to put into the keywords and box, and then that will bring up the properties. What's really key about the key phrases and words, and it's a bit of a technical approach. When I was creating the solution to how we find properties in the PRS, there are loads of challenges. So, for example, if I were to say this beautiful cottage is accessible to the M4, that description, agents and searchers will know that's actually to do with location. The problem is the keywords accessible and M4 will then start producing false positives, which is a really frustrating experience when you're a disabled searcher. And so property platforms can't exclude listings because their clients, the agents, are paying them an absolute fortune to include them. And so the way we get around this and the way they get around it is to use standardized key phrases. So you can see some key phrases which all the agents and all the property portals are getting. If you use a key phrase, then what happens when you put it into, say, Rightmove will return the listings with that entire key phrase at the top of the listings before breaking the key phrase into smaller phrases and then finally into words. And so part of this whole evolution and this kind of change in this update will be to get the information across to the website users or the searchers so they understand how to help themselves. And so that QR code, which we'll come back to it's on a couple of slides later, that takes you to a page on my website, which I'm updating. And I'm about to produce some content, video content, just to make it extra clear. But there's a lot of information coming in quite a short space of time and the various updates. So that's the importance of the standardized key phrases. We have, what's really important about this work is that property experts they're experts in property. And so for me, the challenge has been to keep this fact-based so that we start to create an equality of opportunity. And that's a slightly more long-term strategy, because whilst the government is steadfastly refusing to level the playing field in terms of the homes we build via a planning route, which they're absolutely not going to do, we're stuck with this problem. So the aim of my work is to work with the industry, knowing their constraints, rather than to try and change anything, to ask them or expect them to do things which isn't possible to do. So they're property experts, they're not OTs, they're not anything else, so they can't define a property as accessible. Many of them don't have any clear understanding of the needs of a disabled person. Excuse me. What I do with my training is I take them through what they do need to know so that they can, when they get an applicant with accessible housing needs, they actually can work really well with that person, and they're already identifying properties. And so those people who are viewing the properties to take them on, to get the instructions, are talking with their negotiators who are working with the applicants, and they're having that conversation on a daily basis. So there's some big changes here. And the other thing we need to understand and remember is that those people who are doing the searching have to be responsible for their own decisions. And so we just need to be kind of help sort of clear about what is whose responsibility. So renters have their own responsibilities to make their own decisions, but they need the information in order to be able to do that, which is the agent's responsibility. So potential connections. So I think this is interesting because Paul's asked me to speak today. My work isn't really on DFGs, and I think that there are some overlaps and there are some massive gaps. So for me, one of the biggest gaps with the PRS and the Disabled Facilities Grants is, say, a lot of the work that Mira is doing is around people who live in their homes and want an adaptation, need an adaptation, and the process that's there to support that's where they already live in the homes. My issue is that I have a lot of wheelchair users who simply cannot find a home to live in that meets their needs. And the DFG is, whilst the Constitution is set up to allow for this, on the ground it doesn't. Because if you want to put an offer in on a property and then you say, well, I need to apply for a DFG, I need to get this works done, that whole process could take anything between 6 to 18 months. The first thing the landlord's going to say is, well, or the agent is, okay, so who's paying, are you putting an offer in on the property now, and who's paying for the rent all the time you can't live in the property? And then there's so many unknowns in the process and the timings and whether it's going to be granted and who's paying and how much it's going to be, that on the ground it's virtually impossible. So I find this a really frustrating business in that respect, because I know that we could be doing this in a cleverer way if we could do some joined up thinking between local authorities and private landlords and me, for example. I tend to find that whilst I can deliver solutions, I've got a whole box full of them. Local authorities will work in a very blinkered way because they're overwhelmed with the workload they've got and they can't really think about doing something new or putting up their heads above the parapet. So it's a kind of own goal in that respect. So that's the difference between an existing and a new tenant. Mira touched on this, and this is another really important point, is that actually every time we make adaptations to a property, the idea of ripping them out again and somehow making good is complete nonsense. But then if a DFG only allows for the cheapest bidder, the problem is, like, for the private landlord, that's their property and they want it to look as beautiful as possible. It's the same for the agent. So I see the difference between, say, agents who don't understand it and devalue properties with accessible features, and agents who totally get it, who promote it based on those merits. So the industry is just going through a learning curve at the moment. But a lot of this, if you put in cheap, clinical, ugly adaptations, that doesn't help. If you do a nice job and it's perfectly possible to do this, then we go to the agents that know about this, and with the new features or property characteristics on the property portals and on websites because of the material information update, then actually, the whole thing is coming together so that we're matching the supply and the demand, or the properties and the applicants. Demand is a really fascinating question, and I come across this every week. So Mira talking about her landlords who don't see the demand. There are a whole host of reasons for this. Essentially, every little bit in the industry doesn't join up. A lot of people with a demand, they don't have options, they don't have choice. They've had a soul destroying, sometimes many years, looking for a property. They give up, they stay put, accepting that the unsuitable that they know is better than the unsuitable that they don't know. So it's a really interesting area. And whilst everyone here on the ground totally gets there's a huge demand, that isn't it. It's in a little space, and so part of my work is getting everyone else to go, oh right, okay, there's a demand, great, let's do something about it and make it relatable. Need for tenants to educate themselves. I think, we all have a shared responsibility. So I have a responsibility, tenants have a responsibility, agents and portals have a responsibility. And it's just about getting this information out and leveraging any channel to let people know what is happening, what amazing things actually are happening, although they're, it's slow, it's turning a tanker. And so that we can scale this much faster. So for example, Zoopla and Rightmove, they're data analysts. Their whole business, forget property, they're data analysts. They take that data, they work out what it means, and they sell it to all sorts of clients. Now, all sorts of clients looks like private house builders. So if planning says, no, we're not going to force you to do something, but the Rightmove data says, hey, do you know there's 37% of searches include wanting a wet room, then those developers, they're going to start building it. And this is why the search terms and users using it correctly and asking for things via a search, that will start to be picked up, and it is a means to change down the line. And I've designed it to be like that. And finally, I think I've mentioned this point already, aim for high quality works and aspirational design. We can do it. There's loads. So I work with Jack L. Runnels, and she's absolutely fabulous. And in all the work she does, she recommends certain products which makes them look like homes, not institutional or clinical settings. So I think this is, I don't really separate between landlords. For me, if you are a property owner or you intend to be a property owner, then not considering accessibility is a very short-sighted goal. So with all the stats, and you guys know them, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's our aging demographic. So by 2040, there'll be more people aged 65 and over in the UK than there will be of working age. Begs two questions: where are they going to live? Who's going to care for them? And given that the demand now is I mean, it's a nightmare now. That's going to be, I think, catastrophic, and some pretty horrible institutionalized care if we don't sort it now. So yes, longer term tenants, fewer voids. Just to give you an example of a lovely story with Knight Frank. One of the negotiators had a family with a disabled child. They'd been looking for, I think it was 2 years actually. The valuer was going out, they'd done training with me, so I had no part of this story apart from telling it in arrears. Landlord had inherited a property from their parents after they died. The parents had accessibility features such as a wet room and other things in the property, and he was starting to rip them out because he thought that's what he should do as a refurbishment. The Knight Frank agent said, could you just hold on? Let me go and talk to my negotiators. We've got, there is a huge demand for this sort of thing. The negotiator spoke to the negotiator, went back to the office. They were like, yeah, this looks absolutely perfect. Can we introduce them? Introduce them first before letting any of their other applicants have a go. The dad was absolutely thrilled, said, this is perfect. Put in an offer on a longer term. And because it was market, got nothing to do with exploitation. That property, it was a really racing market. So he was the first to get there. So he put in a higher than asking price. The landlord then refurbished it, but including more accessibility features at his own cost, and so it worked really well. My whenever I get asked the question about pricing with either private landlords or agents, is we're looking to treat these people the same as everyone else, and we're not looking to exploit them on pricing. And I've yet to get a private landlord that I've spoken with that has an issue with that. Mostly they come and find me because they're personally motivated and they really want to do something and they want to make a difference and be part of, part of change. So that they're a really interesting group of people, and there's lots out there, but they're still on a learning curve. And so that last thing on standard setting, that again is just to do with making sure that when we think about designs and when we think about work or updates that we make to a property, we want to aim for the higher standards, not for the minimum standards. Because when people aim for minimum standards, they usually fail to meet them anyway. And then there's just, upset because a landlord might say, well, I've done the works, but there isn't a demand. And it's like, yeah, you've done the works, but you've done them badly. And so I'm quite honest when I have that conversation with people. That's me. Great.
Thank you, Guy. That was really useful and really interesting overview of the new system. Got a lot of love for you in the chat, actually. So kind of comment there from Paulus, and lovely speaker. It's so frustrating working in LAs with DFGs taking up to a year to process before the work starts.
It's a really interesting point. So local authorities, there's such a variety in local authorities, and whether it's public sector or private sector, like I go in, I'm a problem solver and a dot joiner, so I come in with a different angle already. I'm the only person doing what I do. What for me, my challenge is to find the champions within any organization, and so around Hold, say, which is an incredible scheme, and there's some great stuff in the pipeline. But it's about finding, I have a I have a local authority that I'm working with that are looking to pioneer some very innovative stuff, and then we'll share it more broadly, and we can scale it that way. You know, but they're a kind of a hen's tooth. Most local authorities, people are scared to try anything new because they've been burnt on experiments in the past, or they don't think their job's worth it, or they don't, or they're just doing their job. And the directive they've had from the leadership team is your job is X, and so me coming in with Y is a problem for them. We just have to keep moving forwards, and the faster we can increase that rate of change, the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I was kind of interested in when I saw this was that the regulator of social housing has also put a requirement on social landlords to keep better records of their adapted stock. Do you think kind of the methodology that's now being used by, or will be used by, kind of Rightmove would equally kind of work, or could be the basis of a scheme in the social rented sector as well?
I mean, short answer, possibly. Longer answer. So the freedom of information research that Aspire did quite a few years ago now showed that local authorities, they asked how many wheelchair users you've got on your waiting list, and how many wheelchair users, wheelchair accessible properties do you have under your control? And there were three kind of sets of, or three buckets of responses. One was no response. One was, yeah, we don't keep the data. And then there was a small sort of group that said, yeah, we've got the data and it doesn't look very good. It's going to take, I think it was in excess of 26 or 40 years to clear the backlog, provided that no one else joins the list, which of course they're joining the list all the time. The difference is, if you don't have the data, you can't acknowledge the problem or solve the problem. And so one local authority, for example, I work with, when I spoke to them first time, introductory chat, they had no idea of the data. A year and a half later, they know it at a very granular level. That means that we can go out specifically, because one of the issues with the local authorities is, and why you find it so frustrating working with them, is they don't talk to each other. And so post-COVID, somewhere like Milton Keynes realized they had a homelessness issue and COVID was really going to impact it. So the way they solved it was an interdisciplinary approach. So they booked a room and they talked to each other. They found that worked really well, surprise, surprise. So they've continued to do it afterwards. What we need is that interdisciplinary approach in to do with accessibility. But also, I educate local authorities on some primary legislation that came into force in 2015 around best value as opposed to highest cost. And, it was actually a radical Tory. I don't want to get party politics. I don't, they're all, I'm following up on frustrations from all of them. But there is some amazing stuff which people don't know about. And so, my job is to try and pull a whole load of different things together, pilot it, show them how they can solve their own problems and own their own problems and have security of tenure for, ongoing without selling the family silver. So yes, we need the data is a shorter answer, Paul.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think kind of your point about kind of the quality and design of adaptations is kind of well made across the board, because I suppose kind of picking up that last point, there's a difference between price and value for money, and make it as cheap as possible isn't often good value for money, I don't think.
On that one, what's really interesting, so I wrote an article for RICS recently, Chartered Surveyors, about material information updates and various things. And I wanted to use a quote or to quote some Savills research. And they said to me, Guy, that's from 2015. It's a bit old now. And I'm like, this is the point, right? That research was absolutely on the nail and nothing's changed. And it's still as relevant today. And what they were saying is, why are older people holding on to big family homes, with all these bedrooms when they don't need them? And what the research showed was that, well, one massive reason is they've got nowhere accessible and aspirational to downsize to, because we're not building it. This is part of the narrative. This is understanding what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Guy. I think you're going to have a lot of people visiting your website and the link over the next few.
Amazing. Please do get in touch. Send me an email. I love what I do, and there's lots of really exciting stuff going on at the moment.
I came across that. Yeah, we'll definitely be following up. And thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Guy.
Thanks, Paul.